Transcriber, written and read by Larry Enright. Copyright 2013. All rights reserved. This book is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or locales, is entirely coincidental. Chapter 1. At the bend in the stream on a bristlecone pine, where sage grows wild in fields of mustard and clover, blooms a rose. On a vine wound round the ancient trunk, it waits for the journey to begin in a place far from the stream, where the scent of the rose is but a fragrance on the wind and a promise for tomorrow. Benton Dowd set the worn book on the table, closed his eyes, and inhaled its familiar smells, the musty leather, the yellowed paper, the ancient glue and binding string. Some people think we choose our own lives, he said. We don't. Life chooses us. You asked what my book was about? That's what it's about. He pondered these last words over his glass of beer. It was late. The bar was packed with students and professors celebrating graduation. The students were moving on to the next phase in their lives, and the professors to their summer vacations. It had been a good year for everyone, a long one for Dowd. With him at the table was Tam Jackson, who had just finished her first year at Tassiter College. She and Dowd had met in a survey class he was told he needed to take if he wanted to graduate that year. She had helped him survive the parts he deemed useless, which was most of it, and they had become good friends. "I like that, Dowd," she said. "Read more." "I've had too much to drink." "Come on, just a little more, please." Tristan was a young man who wished for no more than a life of simple pleasures, where carefree hearts and unbound spirits could walk the land in solitude. Born in a lowly village at the foot of the mountain, where the snows had fallen at the beginning of time and on whose mighty peak the sun never set, he came from simple folk, who lived in peace more powerful than any sword or stone, and dwelt in contentment deeper than the noble forests. Wise and stoic they worked the land, accepting what gifts the earth would give, and for years uncounted remained this way, for that was their chosen lot. "I love the name Tristan," Tam said. "It sounds so sad. Is it a fantasy?" "That's pretty much what life is, isn't it?" Dowd replied. "Autobiographical?" "I suppose there's a bit of me in there." Gif Atwood, the third person at the table, had been Dowd's roommate for 4 years. They were complete opposites. Where Dowd was frail, Atwood was strong. Where Dowd was introspective, Atwood was gregarious. Dowd was an aesthete, and Atwood a victim of intellectualism. They had both arrived at Tassiter as naive teenagers, yet grew together into manhood as roommates, best friends, and now graduates. Gif spread his arms in mock amazement. "Wait a minute. She bats her eyes and you read for her, just like that? I'm only saying this because you've had that thing for, 4 years, and you've worked on it every day as far as I can tell, yet you wouldn't share with me, your loyal roommate and best friend, one blessed word about it, like it was a big secret or something?" "You're not as cute as me," Tam said. "I can't argue that," said Gif. "What's it called, Dowd?" asked Tam. "I don't have a title yet," he said. Gif had a suggestion. "How about crap I wrote in college when I was supposed to be doing something else?" The fourth and last person at the table laughed. He was a white-bearded older gentleman named Ari Kent, faculty advisor to the 3 students and a good friend and mentor to Dowd. He was professor of linguistics and esoteric studies at Tassiter. For 4 years Kent had urged Dowd along when the young man wanted nothing more than to pursue his own interests or walk in the woods among the fall leaves or swim in the stream when the ice had melted and spring was at hand. Kent saw something special in him and never hesitated to tell him so. Dowd was exceptionally talented, but a poor student. His freshman year he had become fascinated with the piano, and after 2 months of formal lessons embarked upon his own journey into the intricacies of the instrument, becoming a regular fixture in the practice rooms, much to the annoyance of the music majors, and much to the detriment of his regular studies. A visiting professor of music who happened to hear him play one day thought him promising enough to offer to sponsor him at the conservatory, but instead Dowd gave up the piano altogether when spring arrived to awaken the world once more. His sophomore year, Dowd became interested in art and enrolled in classes in painting and graphic design. He spent little time on his other studies that year and long, laborious hours in the studio perfecting his technique. He nearly didn't pass his other courses after a semester in Paris, where he was supposed to be at university, but instead spent his days sketching in museum and his nights in an attic apartment painting landscapes from memory with watercolors he begged from fellow students. After his return to Tassiter, he participated in an art exhibition in the city, and then gave up painting altogether. Dowd's junior year was consumed by days and nights of film and theater. There weren't enough hours in the day to satisfy his thirst for the dramatic that year. He acted in several plays, even directed one, but gave it all up to go rafting for 3 weeks in the spring on a river that cried out to be explored. He missed enough class time to merit expulsion, but Professor Kent stood by him, pled his case before the regents, and won Dowd a reprieve that allowed him to complete his coursework the following summer, with the promise that he would apply himself in the fall. To his credit he had, and he had survived his senior year, to graduate. "I believe the title of Best Crap Submitted was claimed by you on your last term paper, Mr. Atwood," the professor said. Gift sighed. "Ah, yes, the scene of my infamous demise in Witch Hunting 101. That course cost me magna cum laude." "You didn't have to take it," Tam laughed. "Well, I felt like I should take at least one of Professor Kent's courses. After all, he stuck with me for 4 years, and that's no picnic." "You could have audited it or done it pass-fail," she reminded him. "Even Dowd did better than you." "I appreciate your loyalty, Mr. Atwood," said the professor, "though I cannot help but cringe when students call my introductory course Witch Hunting 101. Theories of the occult just doesn't have the same ring to it, Professor." At the bar where students were drinking too much and singing along with the jukebox, one of them stumbled while trying to get off his stool and spilled his drink over his companions. That began a brief spectacle that ended when the owner threw them out. "Remind me again why they call this place Grendel's Lair," Tam asked. "Does it have anything to do with drinking and stupidity?" "I'll drink to that," said Giff. Professor Kent said, "My dear young lady, while I am reluctant to divulge the contents of your upcoming sophomore literature class with my colleague Professor Cahill, I believe I am at liberty to say that it is named after Beowulf's most significant conquest, Grendel, the infamous descendant of humanity's first murderer, Cain. The heroic Beowulf ripped off Grendel's arms, slaying the beast and thus saving the Danes. The trophy you see mounted over the fireplace marks that auspicious occasion." He lifted his glass in a toast. "Here's to a life of arm-ripping adventure and heroic deeds for the graduates." "A severed arm as a trophy? That's just gross," Tam said, pouring Dowd another beer. "You need to get drunk, Dowd. If this is your last night here, I'm going to make sure you go out with a bang." Giff smirked at Dowd, and Dowd passed a grin on to the professor. The 3 of them started laughing. "Shit," said Tam. "I can't believe I just said that. That's not what I meant." Giff leaned in closer. "Then what did you mean?" "I think you know. And I think your Freudian slip is showing." "And I think you need another drink," she said, pouring more beer into Giff's glass. The usual music at Grendel's wasn't Dowd's favorite. While at school he had acquired a taste for the classical, but rarely did anyone choose such a recording from one of the handful on the jukebox. Grendel's was the kind of place where students came to eat and carouse after class, not to enjoy the finer points of a minuet and trio. Drinking and Mozart didn't mix. Yet, on that night of celebration, a Mozart string trio began to play. Dowd looked up at a woman who was watching him from her seat in the far corner of the room. A spot of color on an otherwise drab canvas, she was alone with her glass of red wine and a rosebud lying on her table. The seat opposite hers was empty, yet reserved by a second half-full wine-glass. When their eyes met, she glanced away, and Dowd rejoined the conversation. I'm sorry, what did you say?" Giff shook his head. "I said you never told us how the professor connected you up with Jonas White, and getting anything comprehensible out of you is next to impossible even when you're drunk. So tell us, Professor, how did you get the most famous and decorated writer of our time to hire my loser buddy Dowd to help him with his next book? Is he a friend of yours?" "We've met," the professor said, "and I admire his work. His creativity nourishes the languishing spirit, something that can be said of very few of today's so-called artists. I have high hopes that I will be some day saying that of Benton, too. Are you close to finishing your book, by the way?" he asked Dowd. "No, I'm a long way off." "Well, don't get discouraged. Keep at it." "It's the only thing he has kept at," said Giff. "I wish I had half your talent, Dowd." "Where did you get that old thing, anyway?" Tam asked. She tried to pull the worn leather book out from under Dowd's hand, but he slid it into his jacket pocket. "I received it in the mail my freshman year with no return address," he said. "That's weird." "Maybe it was from your dad," Giff suggested. Dowd shook his head. "So who do you think sent it to you?" Tam asked. "I don't know," said Dowd. He glanced over to the corner of the room. The woman was smiling as she ran her fingertips around the rim of her glass, staring into its burgundy depths. Their eyes met again for a moment. "Can you imagine how long it would take to hand-stitch a blank book like that?" said Tam. "And the marbling must have taken forever." "Yes, indeed," said Kent. "Clearly not an undertaking for today's impatient craftsman." "Nobody has that kind of time," said Giff. "You can't feed a family making one book a year." "Art is not about making money, Mr. Atwood." "I guess not for someone like Jonas White. He inherited a fortune, didn't he, and then made twice that on his books." "He cares not for riches and fame." "That's easy for him to say, considering he was born rich and has won every literary prize there is," Giff said. "I heard he has a summer house just for his awards. Is that what you'll be doing for him, Dowd, polishing his trophies?" "I'll be transcribing for him," said Dowd. "From what to what?" "He's blind, Mr. Atwood," the professor said. "He lost his sight some years ago in a terrible accident." "Really? So, Dowd, he'll dictate and you'll take it all down?" "I'm not sure what I'll be doing, Giff, but Jonas White is a great man, and I admire his work, and the chance to assist him in any way is an honor." "Hoping some of that genius will rub off on you, eh? Maybe if you licked the trophies." Tam punched Giff on the shoulder, and his beer spilled into his lap. "Hey," he said, "that was good beer." She stuck her tongue out at him. "So how did you do it, Professor?" Tam asked. He shrugged. "I merely mentioned to Benton that Jonas White had placed an advertisement in the journal for a graduate assistant. The venerable Mr. White lives north of Tassiter on an estate outside Wenborn. It seemed like a good fit. Benton did the rest." "Dowd did the rest? That's hard to believe," Giff said. The professor dismissed his laughter with a wave. "Benton sees things in the world that most people could never imagine. It's his gift. It would be hard for a man like Jonas White not to recognize that in him." "When did you interview with him, Dowd?" Tam asked. "You never said." "I didn't. I wrote him a letter." "And he hired you just like that? Sight unseen? No pun intended?" "Yes." Dowd smiled as the Mozart moved delicately through a theme that reminded him of a meadow west of town, where the grass grew as high as the deer that grazed there under the summer sky. The deer bolted when fast-moving clouds crossed the field in shadows. "Are you all right?" Tam asked, as he pressed his fingers to his temples. "Yes, it's just that thing again," he said. "You had it checked out, didn't you?" Dowd nodded. "The doctor couldn't find anything wrong. He thinks I might have a hypersensitivity to floaters." "Floaters?" "Bits of collagen that everyone has swimming around in their eyes. Some people have more than others, and some apparently are more aware of them than others." Giff laughed. So when the professor said you see things, he was talking about your floaters? You are such a doofus, said Tam. Did he check your retina for any detachment or tearing? Asked Giff more seriously. He said everything's fine, Giff. I'm supposed to see an eye doctor at least once a year, or right away if it gets worse. Define worse, Tam said. Flashing lights, loss of vision, things like that. Don't worry, I'm fine. Let me guess, said Giff. He told you to keep an eye on it. They all laughed. Not to change the subject, but what are you doing after you recover from this evening of drinking and revelry, Mr. Atwood? The professor asked. Considering a career in comedy, perhaps? Not all of us are as lucky as Dowd, Giff shrugged. I'm going home to the farm. My dad worked hard to send me here these 4 years. The way I see it, I owe him 4 back. An honorable calling, Kent said, and you are an honorable man, Mr. Atwood. Right. And 4 years from now, my honorable resume will have 3 lines, B.A. in Classics, B.A. in Art History, and 4 years' experience milking cows. Some of the world's greatest thinkers and leaders throughout history began as farmers. I dare say they would argue that those qualifications would suffice. Maybe, Professor, but farming and liberal arts won't open any doors in today's job market. For the man of letters, the door is always open, Mr. Atwood. The trick is finding the right door. What about me? Said Tam. What about the woman of letters? The world belongs to women, Miss Jackson. Men just haven't realized that yet. Dowd's attention wandered across the room. The woman was taking a sip of wine. She smiled at him in a manner reminiscent of a Renaissance painting, one that Dowd had studied and sketched during his semester in Paris. The expression in the painting had been intriguing and ambiguous, as if the artist were unable to decide how to render it. "Are you all packed, Benton?" the professor asked. The Mozart trio shifted into the relative minor. "Yes, Professor. Such as it is, everything is packed." "You have your train ticket and reservation?" "Yes, sir. I'm on the 8:30 local tomorrow morning, and my reservation at the inn is confirmed." "Why didn't you book the express later in the day? It's far less travel time." "I'm not in any hurry, and it will give me a chance to see a part of the country I've never seen before." "There's a reason you haven't seen that part of the country, Dowd," Giff said. "It's the uninteresting, rural and uninteresting part. And did I mention uninteresting?" "He'll go by your farm, won't he?" Tam said, following Dowd's gaze across the room to the woman who was accepting another glass of wine from the waiter. "The railroad runs through our south pasture. It's noisy, but it keeps the cows entertained." "Who is that woman, Dowd?" asked Tam. "I think she's staring at you." "I don't know." He inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. "Do you smell that?" he asked. "Smell what?" said Giff. "The rose on that woman's table." "The only thing I smell is beer." The woman turned her attention again to her glass of wine. Tam faced away from her. "She's striking, isn't she?" Dowd shrugged. "She seems bored," Giff said, "but yeah, killer looks." "Speaking of killer, I hope she's not Grendel's mother," whispered the professor. "She was quite put out at her son's demise, you know, and given so many of the graduates' resemblance to the bearded Beowulf, I would hazard a guess that if she is, she intends to exact her revenge this very night." The 3 looked at him, and he blushed. "And I believe I have had too much to drink. But there is a solution to that," he said, filling first his glass and then the others. "And that would be to have another. So we all forget what I just said." Giff feigned a whisper. "I think she's checking me out." "That would explain her boredom, Giff," said Tam. "Come on, drink up. I'm determined to see at least one of you 2 graduates get drunk tonight. It's a long-standing college tradition that you're both doing your best not to uphold." Dowd stood up. "I'll be back in a minute." "What happened when Beowulf met Grendel's mother, Professor?" Tam asked, watching him walk over to the woman's table. "Why, he slew her, of course," Professor Kent replied. The woman looked up as Dowd approached. He gestured to the rose. "By any other name? Its scent is beautiful. It fills this place." The trio ended, but an emotional precision lingered until consumed by a song of more modern and cacophonous proportions. "Tell me," she said, "what does beauty smell like?" Her words were the wind rustling the treetops. An idea best explained by example, I suppose, such as a piece of music, a painting, a face, a rose. That sounds like something Aristotle would say. You know your classics. I know Aristotle. Dowd looked at the empty chair. You've been waiting all evening. And you and your companions are wondering who I am, she said. Too old to be a student, not dressed as a teacher, and yet I seem familiar to you. Actually, you do. My name is Dowd, he said. I'm Mary. She asked him to sit down. That brought the waitress and an inquiry whether they wished to see menus, but neither did. Tell me if you like the wine, she said, when they were alone again. Dowd took a sip and was reminded of a warm summer day when the breeze carried the seeds and scents of flowers spreading across the meadow. I do like this one, he said. It brings back a memory from my childhood of a vineyard. It's only a vague one, but in it I'm on a hillside covered with grapevines. My mother is chasing after me. I'm running between them, and we're laughing. Her eyes were the color of the moss covering the base of a tree where he would often sit in the shade and watch the clouds waltz across the sky. And do you remember if your mother made the grapes into wine? A shadow passed across his face. I'm sorry, she said. She died a long time ago, said Dowd. Yet you love her, and the wound from her loss is still open. Dowd took another sip of the wine and closed his eyes. He was sitting on the stone wall that marked the edge of the family property, watching his mother in her favorite blue and yellow polka-dot dress pick flowers from the field beyond the yard. I was 3, he said, picking up the rose as red as the wine and as fragrant as summer. I don't remember much about her, but I do remember that the dinner table was never complete without at least one flower. Now she's lost, like a memory that has traveled too far. The loss of one loved truly is a loss never lessened, Mary said. Dowd studied her ambiguous eyes, the line of her chin and the delicate upturn at the corners of her mouth. Yet ever merciful it slips in and out of memory, a firefly at dusk. Sadness tinged her smile. When I read those lines from your poem in the journal, I cried. My English professor told me they were sententious. Perhaps. I wrote them for her. Yes, I know. I'm surprised anyone reads the journal. Its circulation doesn't extend beyond the college library and required reading list for English majors. Do you live in town? Maybe that's why you seem so familiar. She shook her head. A copy was in the room upstairs where I'm spending the night. You were here for graduation, then? A relative, perhaps, and I've seen you visiting before. Her green eyes flashed like a star falling across the night sky. She took another sip of wine. You're very curious. And you're very mysterious. She laughed. I came to see the graduation. I'll be returning home tomorrow. He set the wineglass down on the table. I'm leaving tomorrow myself. Don't be sad. I've been told I'm not very good at hiding my emotions. No, you're not. Her gaze focused across the room. Your friends seem anxious for your return. Yes, I guess they'll want the full report on you. You can tell them that Grendel's mother has decided to spare you. She extended her hand. I am so glad you came over, Dowd. The departing sun caresses your face. An uncertain wind brushes the tall grass before the gentle rain greets the night. We will meet again some day, in a far-off place and distant time, he said, taking her hand, and it will be as if we never parted. Mary blushed. I'm sorry, said Dowd. I've had too much to drink. I wrote that last night and for some reason thought of it just now. Goodbye, Mary. A late-arriving, unruly crowd of underclassmen was making its way through the center of the room. Dowd waited for them to pass, but got swept up in their push toward the staircase that led to a private dining area above the bar. He tried to pull free of a burly young man who had wrapped an enthusiastic arm around his shoulder to offer him a drink from his bottle, but got hit on the head in the process. Dowd stumbled. A shadow drifted across his vision like a curtain closing. The revelers were no longer revelers, but an angry torch-bearing mob that knocked him to the ground and pushed past him on their march toward a castle on a hill in the distance. Fires burned everywhere, and smoke rose in unholy columns to darken the sky. As Dowd reached out to try and stop them, a hand grabbed his and lifted him up. "Sorry about that, mate," said the burly fellow. "Guess I've had one too many. Can I buy you a round?" The shadow passed. The torches became no more than flickering table candles, and the boisterous revelers continued making their way upstairs. "No thanks," Dowd said. When he looked back to Mary's table, she was gone. He retrieved the rose she'd left behind and returned to his friends. "I can honestly say I won't miss that bunch," said Giff. "Are you okay, Dowd?" "Yes, I'm fine. It was an accident." "So? Who is she?" Tam asked. "I doubt he can tell. He was drooling too much," said Giff. "And boy, did she have the hots for you, Dowd." "Her name is Mary," Dowd said. "She is definitely not from around here," said Giff. "And how do you know that?" Professor Kent asked. "Not frumpy enough." "I hope that is not a comment on my lovely colleagues, Mr. Atwood. It's not too late to change your grades and give us another crack at you, you know." "Oops," said Giff. Dowd pressed the rose between the pages of his book. "I have a title," he said. "I'm calling it The Rose." "I like that," said Tam. "The Rose. It's simple, yet beautiful." "It will make the cover art easier for the paperback release," said Giff. "A rose with a big thorn sticking out and blood dripping all over." "Giff," said Tam, "it's not a book about vampires and witches." "How do you know? He's only read us 2 paragraphs. "How old would you say she is?" Dowd asked. They argued the question without consensus over another round of drinks. Atwood thought her to be in her late 20s. Dowd, who admittedly had the most intimate views, seemed to think she was older than that. Tam's impression was that Mary was much younger and using makeup and manner of dress to appear older and more sophisticated. The professor was of the opinion that women alone understood the art of and the need for disguising their true age, and that hazarding any guess was indeed the most hazardous endeavor undertaken by man. "That's because society allows men to age gracefully," Tam said. "When a man is old and wrinkled, he's called distinguished, but a wrinkly old woman, she's a hag or a crone or some other unflattering thing. We're held to a different standard, Professor." "Nevertheless, my point stands that your mystery woman could be as young as you or as old as me, and we would be none the wiser." The conversation drifted on to other topics. They talked about changes to the campus over the years, some good, some not so good. They told humorous stories about the students and the professors they had known. They remembered some of their less fortunate friends who hadn't made the grade and were forced to leave school. They laughed at the crazy things they had done that they would never have believed possible 4 years ago, and they became serious over moral issues that had arisen and united the student body politic. Professor Kent invariably took over the discussion when it touched on politics, or when they wandered too far astray for his tastes, and when he did that, the three knew to either come up with something more interesting to talk about, or prepare themselves for a long dissertation on the role of politics in society. They had come to that point in the evening, as the alcohol was winning the battle of wits, when Professor Kent raised his hand for silence, as was his simple way in class and elsewhere. "There are 3 prominent types of life," he struggled to remember. "The life of pleasure, the political, and... what was the other one? Oh, yes, the contemplative." "I call dibs on pleasure," Giff snorted into his beer. "You would," said Tam. No, Kent waved. "Listen to me. The masses of mankind are slavish in their tastes. Slavish, I say, preferring a life suitable to beasts. But who can blame them? They are doing no more than imitating so many of those in high places." "You said it," said Giff. "Remember the banker who got caught in that scandal a few years ago? What was his name? I can't imagine the amount of money that changed hands to smooth that one over." "Exactly my point," the professor emphasized, pounding his fist on the table and nearly tipping his glass into his lap. "But people of superior refinement, present company included, identify happiness with honor, virtue, and above all, the political life." "Oh, come on, Professor," said Giff. "Politicians are the worst of the bunch." "It wasn't always that way." Kent wagged his finger and then stared at it, as if coming to some private revelation. "What was I saying again?" Tam put her hand on Dowd's arm and brought him back to the conversation. "Read us more of your book, Dowd, please." "Oh, I don't know." "Come on, Dowd, we're sinking fast," Giff said. "Yes, Benton," said Professor Kent. "Inspire us with your eloquent prose, lest the spirits of darkness whisk this conversation off to a premature grave." Dowd opened the book and read. "Before this world, before the universe, and before everything, there was chaos without beginning, existence without substance. Everything was nothing, at once infinite and infinitesimal. From this chaos came the one who bore us all. From her spirit came the heavens to cover her on every side. The hills she gathered at her feet to walk upon. Her tears were the seas and the oceans. The rivers wide, the valleys deep. She was them all, and they were her. One being, one life. She loved this creation as a mother does her child, and from this love came man and woman, fish and fowl, rock and tree, all spirits of the one being, aspects of her singularity. And as aeons passed and love flowered, they prospered in the goodness of the Spirit, and grew in bounty in the first season of time." Dowd closed his eyes and stopped. "Okay, that was weird," Giff said. "What?" said Tam. "Because Dowd's story has a female god in it? You know you wouldn't be here if it weren't for your mother, right? If you could just get past your typical male chauvinistic point of view, you might realize that God has to be a woman." "Why? Because things are so messed up?" "No, because only a woman can create life." "Don't stick your tongue out at me," Giff said. "This is Dowd's mutant Gaia derivative creation thing story, not mine. No offense, Dowd." Dowd shrugged. "That was a very colorful rebuttal, Mr. Atwood, but quite inaccurate," the professor noted. "In Dowd's tale there is no male symbolism whatsoever, whereas in Greek mythology Gaia was the female, or earth, and the male, or heaven, was Uranus." They laughed, and when the professor realized what he had said, he laughed with them. "The joke that never gets old," said Giff. "So, Dowd, what made you decide to put a skirt in charge and not Uranus?" Dowd ran his fingertips across the page. "What difference does it make if the Creator's spirit is portrayed as male or female? We have such a limited language to describe things that are beyond our understanding, and when we try, we can only hope to approximate the truth. The point is, everything that exists is what we call creation, and creation is the expression of a Creator spirit." "If you say so," Giff said. "When you create something this complex and beautiful, Giff, you put your heart and soul into it, and it becomes you. Take Mozart, for example. When you hear one of his pieces played, you know it's his. When you see a painting by Michelangelo, you have no doubt who painted it, because his art was his expression of himself. Think of the world in this way. The entire universe is the expression of the one Spirit, and everything in it is an aspect of this singularity we call God. And we know this because God has put heart and soul into its making." "And you believe this?" "I do." Giff grabbed Dowd's book out from under his hand and said, "What other weird things have you got in here, Dowd?" The rose fell to the floor. Giff looked up from the page and said, "Dowd, what gives? This is blank. Did you just make all that up?" Dowd snatched the book from Giff's hand and picked up the flower. "Please don't do that again, Giff." He pressed the rose between the pages, put the book into his jacket pocket, and got up. "I'll be right back. I have to use the restroom." As he walked off, Tam scowled at Giff. "Do you have to be such a jerk all the time?" "He's my friend. He knows I love him. Besides, the page was blank." Tam shook her head. "Then you were on the wrong page, you goof. Oh, never mind. You're drunk." Excuse me," Professor Kent said, getting up. I think nature is calling me as well." Kent followed Dowd into the restroom. Is everything all right, Benton? Yes, he just doesn't understand. Perhaps not, but that's not what's bothering you, is it? No. You had another vision, didn't you? Yes, like a memory. I sometimes feel like I've already lived my life, that I'm just replaying scenes from it, and that these memories are of what already happened, and are becoming clearer the closer I get to when they occur. At other times I think I'm just crazy. I see things that aren't there, and say things that don't make any sense. I just don't know. Did it involve that woman? Yes, and something else. Perhaps the men's room isn't the best place for such a discussion. I'll be in my office early tomorrow morning if you want to stop by before you leave. Thank you, sir, but there's really nothing more to talk about. When they returned to the others, Dowd said, I'm sorry I got mad, Gif. Too much liquor. Forget it, Gif said. It's my fault. I don't know when to quit kidding around. It comes from hanging around too many farm animals, I guess. The rest of the evening passed in meandering nostalgia, remembering afternoons on the quad, evenings spent cramming for exams, favorite subjects and ones too difficult for words. During these times of struggle, growth, and learning, the professor had been their rock, their safe haven in every storm, and his wisdom and knowledge their inspiration to succeed. Dowd and Gif agreed they would miss him as a mentor and a friend. Promises were made to stay in touch, indefinite plans were laid to get together for dinner again soon, but the four knew that this night at Grendel's lair could very well be their last together. When closing time came, the professor bid them good luck and best wishes, and went home. Gif returned to their rooms for his final night on campus, and Dowd walked Tam back to her dorm. They stopped on a footbridge over a stream where it fed a shallow pond. Beyond the reeds and the tall grass and the carpet of green algae clinging to its banks, a line of ducks slept on the water with their heads turned backward, nestled into their feathers. Another couple walking hand in hand on the path stopped beneath a stand of sassafras trees to kiss in the moonlight. Under the stars, the night creatures played a sad symphony. The world rejoices, yet nature is crying, Dowd said. Maybe it knows how sad I am to see you two go, said Tam. It's hard to say goodbye. I know what you said back there, Dowd. But will you write when you get settled, please? I don't want you to just walk out of my life. You're my friend. I'll try, but I can't promise anything, Tam. I've never been very good at keeping up my end of a friendship. I know you'll be busy, and I know it's important to you. After all, it's not everyone who gets a chance to work for a man like Jonas White. But don't forget your friends and the people who love you. Don't forget me, Dowd. I won't.